In today's video, we have all kinds of news and rumors to discuss, including the latest trade talk around teams like the Montreal Canadiens, lots of talk around the Buffalo Sabres, and a couple of big moves they may be looking to make here soon, plus the Philadelphia Flyers and Edmonton Oilers and Washington Capitals all in the rumor mill here today. Plus, we have news from the NHL waiver wire, big celebration tonight in Minnesota to honor Marc-Andre Fleury, several other news updates around roster moves, injuries, etc. coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and some trade rumors to take a look at here today. But before we jump into all that, I actually have another news story I want to touch on quickly. More of a news story from the junior ranks, but I think it's certainly something that I think people should take note of. Considering what's going on right now in the investigation and police charges against the 2018 Canadian World Junior players, the 5 players we know are facing charges and awaiting trial at this point. There's another case not connected to a World Junior team, but we've seen a few other cases around junior hockey players. And the only reason I kind of mainly want to talk about this here today is really to kind of drive home the idea that it's a culture issue as much as it is, other things. Obviously, sexual assault is not something that you want to see anywheres, but it does seem to be, unfortunately, happening, or at least in the past, and hopefully we can cut this down in the future, that it's happened way too much of these ranks. So Noah Corson, you may recognize that name. He's the son of former longtime NHLer who had a great career, Shea Corson, was found guilty of sexual assault. This is a case that happened back in 2016 with a girl that was under the age of 16 at the time. This was also another group setting. He was not the only one involved here. There was 2 of his other junior hockey players involved. Those other 2 players had already been found guilty of their charges, and now Corson is the latest here, awaiting sentencing at this point. But again, this goes to show that this seems to be happening, I think, or has happened in the past a lot more than we probably ever realized. Unfortunately, you take a look at the statistics around sexual assault, not just connected to the world of hockey, but just in the world in general. Way more cases go unreported than the ones that do. A lot of the times it never makes it to police. It just makes you think that it's a bigger issue within that age group of the game than we may all probably want to acknowledge and realize. So Noah Corson's going to be looking at obviously some pretty hard repercussions here from his actions. He was an undrafted player, never got drafted out of junior, but he was on a 2-way contract playing between the East Coast Hockey League and the American Hockey League. So he was playing in Drummondville in the Quebec League at the time. So the 2 players were from the Quebec League as well. So certainly, like I said, just another case where we've seen something similar happen to what's being, alleged and charged right now for the players of the 2018 Canadian World Junior team. So it's certainly something that unfortunately has happened more often than we would like to probably think. And it's something that I hope that we can see a shift in culture and a shift in mindset and get this away from the game of hockey. And obviously this is a case as well, just to young people in general and people of all ages. Like, I just don't understand these types of crimes, why, how you can think that way, that something like that is okay, just blows my mind. Hard to imagine, but hopefully we can see things change moving forward. On a more positive story, tonight should be a fun night in Minnesota. Of course, Minnesota Wild are at home to do battle with the Pittsburgh Penguins, so it's the perfect night, perfect opponent to honor longtime goalie Marc-Andre Fleury. Tonight is Fleury Night in Minnesota, obviously playing recently in 1,000 games, so he's being honored for that, as well as getting to number 2 all-time in wins. Like I said, it just seems fitting that this is obviously against his former mates in Pittsburgh. I know he met with his former teammates Crosby and Letang earlier today. I've seen it on social media. They had a nice painting done up for him and whatnot. So, I mean, he's had a remarkable career. A lot of people seem to think this is kind of like a retirement tour for Fleury. Some think that, I know Elliotte Friedman said on his latest podcast that if Fleury is ended up traded at the deadline, if Minnesota talks to him and he does want to try to go to a contender, then that's probably a signal that this is it, and he wants to go out trying one last time to win the Stanley Cup. If he stays in Minnesota, then you just never know until he announces his retirement. I think some people will still think there's a possibility he returns next year. But like I said, this year, whole season long, it's kind of felt like, almost like a retirement tour, like a last time he's going to do this, last time he's going to do that, and this could be the last time he does battle here against his former mates in Pittsburgh. So certainly wish Fleury a great night. I'm sure that the Penguins are going to be in tough against their former teammate, and great to see him be recognized for having such a remarkable career. Definitely going to be a Hall of Famer, no doubt. Some quick news from the NHL waiver wire. We did have a player in the Sharks organization on unconditional waivers yesterday. Leon, I believe his last name is pronounced Gawanke. He's German. He's heading back to sign with Adler Mannheim, and they came to a mutual agreement to terminate his contract and leave the American Hockey League and head back to Germany. So that's been completed. He cleared waivers and will be heading back there ASAP. Some other news and notes from around the league when it comes to roster moves. We saw the Maple Leafs today recall defenseman Max Lajoie. Of course, they play tomorrow against the Sens. It's believed at this point he was recalled just as a precaution. Don't know for sure if he's going to get into the lineup. Ottawa Senators young prospect Robbie Herventi apparently had knee surgery and is done for the year. It's an unfortunate scenario. He was playing a good role for them at the American Hockey League. Got into a decent amount of NHL games to make his debut earlier this year. Had a good preseason. Looks like he really took a big step this year in his development into having a chance to be a full-time NHLer. I mean, obviously, likely wasn't going to happen this year, but I thought really, based on what we've seen from him, that he was trending in that direction. It wouldn't shock me next year if he really was, possible to at the very least get more games in. But that knee surgery will certainly end his season earlier than planned and anticipated, and will set things back a bit. So hopefully he can recover and come back strong next year. The Anaheim Ducks announced today that Mason McTavish will miss tonight's game. It doesn't sound like he's going to be out long, but he is out of the lineup at least for one night, is for sure. The Habs today announced that their ready return is Alex Newhook, so he's been out for an extended time with a high ankle sprain. So Lucas Condotta gets sent back to Laval. Minnesota also sent back Adam Beckman to the American Hockey League today as well. And Dustin Wolf has been recalled with the Calgary Flames organization. Apparently Dan Vladar is dealing with an injury, which a lot of people thought a little skeptical because he hasn't played in a bit, but they're saying it's something that happened in practice. Some are speculating, wondering if it could be really more so like a trade protection type of thing, but I'm not so sure about that, but we'll see. It could be because he has been rumored to be on the move. The Flames are likely going to move a goalie sooner than later, but the last we had heard about Vladar is that there really wasn't a lot of interest from other teams, so we'll have to see where things go on that front. All kinds of rumors and speculation floating around in the rumor mill for different trades. We may see lots of information today from a combination of sources. I want to start talking about the Buffalo Sabres first up. The After the Whistle podcast, of course, features a couple of former NHL players, former guys who used to work for the Sabres as well, and Rivet and Peters. And they had some interesting info on today's episode, indicating that the Buffalo Sabres are looking to make a couple of moves sooner than later. These moves may or may not happen before the deadline. If they don't, I would look for them to happen in the early part of the offseason. But they are apparently shopping Casey Mittelstadt, and not only shopping him, but shopping him hard is what they said. Apparently Casey Mittelstadt, it's fair to say, he had a bit of a breakout year last year, kind of finally put things together and had a better season, realizing some of that potential that when he was first drafted, kind of coming together better. And this year he's on pace to have similar type results, but he is a pending restricted free agent. It seems to be a case where the Sabres are not really keen on signing him long term and offering him a big raise like he's probably going to be looking for. We've seen a lot of his other teammates, Thompson, Cousins, Power, Dahlin, etc., get long-term deals. And it doesn't sound like he's one that they really want to go there with. The other option here, of course, is that they could sell high on his value. I mean, Mittelstadt took the long road, you could say, in development to getting to the point where he's become a more productive, steady NHL player. And at this point in time, would have good value. He's 25 years old, still has one more year of team control as an RFA, and has been finally putting together a couple of back-to-back, 55, 60-point seasons. So, clearly I think there's lots to like about where his game is headed and where it's at. So clearly, they're a case that really boils down to not wanting another long-term deal. The other thing here, too, is you got to remember they've extended long-term lucrative contracts to Dylan Cousins and Tage Thompson to be their top two centers. Casey Mittelstadt also is a center. Not really sure he's really a number three. Could very well gain better value shopping him for another piece. Now, the Sabres are also would love to get another top four defenseman. That's no secret. That's been out there for quite some time. But between Dahlin and Power, they'd like somebody else to play on the right side with one of them. Samuelsson also kind of fits into that top four role. But Samuelson's dealt with a lot of injuries as well. So he's right now currently out for the season. So clearly, they could add one more. Top four guy on the right side would be preferable. They have a few different options that they can use on the third pair right now, including some veteran help that was brought in as free agents. But another top four right shot defenseman would be the preference to bring in, and very well could be the type of return they look for on a Casey Mittelstadt trade. However, the other big deal that the Sabres are looking at, according to this podcast and their sources here, is that they're really wanting to bring in a number one goaltender. They're not really absolutely in love and ready to hand the ball to any of their three goaltenders to run with the number one job. I think it's fair to say that Eric Comrie's time with the organization is probably going to come to an end soon. They'll find ways to part ways with him in one way or another before too long. I don't think he's got a future there. I think UPL and Devin Levi maybe could have a future there. Hard to say if both of them do. And I have to think that Devin Levi would get preference in that conversation if you can only keep one. The main name that they've been attracted to, according to these sources that they're talking about on this podcast, is John Gibson out of the Anaheim Ducks organization. Now, Gibson has been rumored to be looking for a deal out of Anaheim and get into a more competitive situation for an extended time. He does have a modified no trade, so there's no quite clear-cut answer if he'd be open to going to Buffalo or not. But he's from the eastern part of the U.S. He's a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania born guy. I don't see an opportunity for him in the state of Pennsylvania on either of those teams anytime soon, given where their things are at. I mean, the Penguins, for example, signed Tristan Jarry to a long-term deal this past offseason. So, there was some talk about him maybe going to Pittsburgh. That was one of the rumored teams, but they opted to extend Jarry on a long-term contract instead. So here we are. Buffalo would be in the Eastern time zone, not too far from there. Would it be a place he'd be willing to go to? It's difficult to say, but Gibson's a player that they appear to have targeted, and I know the boys in the podcast they were talking about what the return could be, and if they could avoid trading UPL and Levi, that they would, but if they had to include UPL, that's something they could do as well. The idea here would be to run with a tandem of Gibson and UPL if they could, and let Devin Levi have like a full year in the minors and maybe deal with the situation, maybe looking at possibly dealing UPL, unless things change, of course, maybe a year or so down the road. But for right now, the Ducks are probably going to want some type of goaltender in return, and really UPL could be a great guy to work in tandem with Lucas Dostal in Anaheim. That might be a great pair for them. So ultimately, they don't have a ton of faith and confidence right now in all three goalies to be a true number one and give them a chance to win every night. And it sounds like they would have a lot more confidence in a guy like Gibson. So, Mittelstadt could also maybe end up in a conversation like that. At the same time, though, the Ducks are pretty deep at center as well with a lot of great young talent there. So I'm not sure that Mittelstadt would be a player they would want in return. I think it would probably be more of a combination, like I said, of another goalie like UPL, and maybe then we're looking at draft picks or prospects otherwise to bring back whatever else is necessary in return to acquire the contract of John Gibson. But Mittelstadt could go to a variety of teams. I mean, there's teams out there that need help at center. We know that for sure. It's a hot market, and there's not a ton of players out there that's available. Washington desperately needs help at center. They lost Backstrom for the season. Kuznetsov's out indefinitely in that player assistance program. Are they going to look to add, even if they don't really know if they want to do it for this year, the deadline to push for the playoffs? it's still a situation where moving forward, they're going to need help with center. So even if it's not a play for now, it could be a play for the future. I mean, the Flames come to mind as a possibility. They just traded Lindholm, so they could probably use a centerman. You got a team like Colorado has been looking for a number 2 center for quite a while. Maybe there's a fit there. There's definitely lots of teams out there that kind of come to mind. Even a team like Boston, their division rival here. I mean, the Bruins have been looking to make an addition. They were in on Lindholm, but the prices were way too high. But it might be a case where Kevin Adams wants a pretty high price tag here as well. That may not work as well. It's kind of hard to say. But the Sabres are a team that expects to make some big moves, or at least trying to. And, a team that's going to probably be busy here ahead of the deadline. So I'll be curious to see now that we have a couple of more, Sabres rumors, how the things will follow up here with them in the coming days and weeks leading to the deadline, which is just under a month away. In Philadelphia, a couple of things that have been kind of updated here. I know Friedman and Merrick on the 32 Thoughts podcast today were talking about the blue line in Philly. It was a long belief that Sean Walker, after the arrival of Jamie Drysdale, was definitely going to be moved. Now they're saying there's a possibility that Walker could maybe stay, and it could end up seeing Rasmus Ristolainen be moved instead. Now, we've brought Rasmus Ristolainen up here recently in the past week here on the channel as a potential target. It was believed teams like the Leafs and I think the Canucks were the main teams that were linked to having some degree of interest in the blue liner. It would require some salary retention by the Flyers. I don't think any team is going to take him at full value. But if they can work that out, that's a possibility that we could end up seeing. But it's going to be trickier if the Flyers find that their teams are looking for too much retention or just not getting the kind of return they're hoping for, then they may shift gears and end up moving Walker after all. Friedman also made mention that it's looking more and more likely that Scott Laughton is going to be moved. They've seen a decrease in his ice time, and based on how the team is trending, that maybe it's just time to make a change, and Laughton could benefit from a fresh start with another club. I know Merrick had mentioned maybe the Sabres being an option, but I'm like, if they're looking to move Middlestat, I'm not really sure they're going to want to bring in Laughton. But, maybe that could be a deal that even kind of connects the dots there as well. I mean, obviously, Laughton's a different type of player. He can play center. He can be a winger too. So, not sure how each team feels about that, but that's something that you could maybe look at as a potential connection there. Long term, I think the Flyers are open to a variety of things. So we'll see on that front. But Laughton's more and more likely getting closer to being dealt, according to what they were talking about on the podcast today. And also, when it comes to the Oilers, they said definitely their primary focus is getting Jake Gensel. The problem is the Penguins have not made a clear-cut decision yet on if they're going to become sellers or what this is going to, how this is going to go down at the deadline. So there's no real answer to know if he's even going to be available yet. But if he is available, he will become 100% the Oilers' top target. Like I mentioned yesterday, there are some other names out there to keep an eye on that they could shift to should he not be there, including guys like Eberle or Tarasenko, depending on what their availability status is. I'm not convinced that either of them are 100% going to be available too. The Kraken could sneak into a playoff spot. And obviously, if they're in the mix, they're not going to move Eberle. And with Tarasenko, like I said, there are some that still believe there's a possibility he may want to re-sign in Ottawa. So we'll have to wait and see where things go on that front as well. And in Washington, there's belief that Max Pacioretty, if the Capitals are not going to be in the mix here, and right now they're on a bit of a losing streak and things aren't looking the greatest for them, that Pacioretty would be willing to likely waive his no-move clause if it meant getting him to a contending team to get some playoff action in. Pacioretty hasn't had the greatest results since he was able to return, since he came back from that injury with the Achilles tendon. He's got 1 goal in 14 games. So obviously, I don't know how much level of interest there's going to be in him. Obviously, he's got a great history, great resume, but where he's played so little in the past 2 years and has had not the greatest showing since he's returned, there may or may not be a ton of interest. So we'll have to see. But if there is interest, it's believed that he may be willing to do that, which could be a good idea for the Capitals to get something in return. And in Montreal, it's believed that, according to Sportsnet, which in reading their thought process here does make sense, but Sportsnet.ca has a new updated article contributed by various Sportsnet staff on their top 30 players to watch ahead of the NHL trade deadline. And one that was a little surprising was young Montreal defender Jordan Harris. Jordan Harris is a player who they feel is more likely to get traded, and if it doesn't happen now, it could again be a deal that we see in the summer. But essentially, the Montreal Canadiens do have a bit of a logjam on the left left side of their blue line. He is not the greatest on the right side, so there's belief that it's not really preferable on a long-term basis to have him move to be a right defenseman. The rise and strong play of another young defenseman in the name of Jaden Struble has kind of made him be a little bit more expendable. Harris has been in and out of the lineup. I do also wonder about the future of Arber Xhekaj as well. I know based on comments recently from Marty St. Louis, not really sure that he kind of sees him being ready right now for a full-time role, so I'm curious to see what the future holds for him. But in the case of Harris, not only is he being outplayed recently by Struble, but they've also got a top prospect coming in, Lane Hudson. So they need to kind of make sure that there's an option for him to play games once he comes out of college, which very well could happen this year at the end of their college season. So Jordan Harris is an interesting young defender that very well could have interest in a variety of teams out there. Look at the teams that are kind of rebuilding, is definitely having a fair bit of interest here. So we'll be curious to see if the Montreal Canadiens do strike here on a move. But they have more than enough capable young D that at some point, one or two of these guys are likely going to get dealt, and it could start to happen here before the March deadline. So let me know your thoughts on all of today's news and trade rumors around the NHL. We'll talk about it further down in the comment section. Of course, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around so you don't miss any future updates on all the updates from around all 32 NHL teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.